Hello, this is Michelle Houck, and this is my Module 5 reflection. So for my ID project, I am working on a series of lessons for my 11th grade English classroom. So my students will be able to make connections between the play The Crucible and modern day witch hunts. So cases of modern day either witch hunts or hysteria, things like the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare, and so on. So through this, student in writing will improve along with their presentation skills. So the learning outcomes, create a research essay and presentation. So learning outcomes include using reliable sources, collaborating successfully with peers, writing and presenting findings, which also, of course, leads to oral presentation skills. All these outcomes are expected throughout this project. Based on the learning objectives. So learners will be able to use research skills to write and present findings on modern witch hunts. I had more learning outcomes than learning objectives because I felt like that objective had many smaller outcomes that would need to be monitored and checked on to make sure the students are successful and can reach that end objective. So while the overall objective of this task is to use those research skills to write and present findings on their assigned topic, they need all those sub outcomes to be successful. And those are sort of the places that lead me to believe, okay, this is where I'm going to need to make sure I'm checking and monitoring so that I know that they are achieving those smaller outcomes that build up to that larger objective. And that was sort of my course of thought on this. To do so, you need learning activities that get you there, along with summative informative assessments, which was the sort of focus of this module. So to meet those outcomes and goals, you need smaller activities that build you up into that. So the first one is a web quest on reliable sources. So reintroducing the students into that topic of reliable sources through a web quest. So a web quest is a sort of like a hyperdoc. They're very similar, but it is in its entirety a pre-made activity that leads students through the internet to gather information that, though it could have been given in notes, this makes it a more hands-on experience, that they're finding the information themselves, figuring out how to use it, figuring out what it means, but guided by the teacher. And I find web quests or hyperdocs to be really great for things that are being reviewed as 11th graders. They should have a pretty solid foundation and reliable sources. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page in case there is either students who have forgotten or haven't received that information. But I also don't want to spend too much time on something that by 11th grade they've probably experienced more than once. Another learning activity is guided notes and outlines for their research. So they will have both independent notes and a group write up this project. Students can work in small groups, so somewhere between 4 or fewer. This way, each student is held accountable for their own work, but also they need to work and collaborate successfully to achieve their end goal. So the research is not up to the students to figure out what they should know, but it's a guided research with me giving a handout that kind of explains what they're doing, where they should be going. And then presentation practice. So 60-second speeches. This is a technique where you give students different scenarios to practice talking in front of the group, but it's a low pressure situation. So the 60-second speeches, generally, there are lots of ways you can do them, but the way I was planning on doing it was having each student randomly assigned a particular purpose. So Oscar nomination speech, giving your 2 weeks notice, things like that. All very random, all very different from one another. And then each student gets time to kind of decide what they're going to say. Remember, it's just 60 seconds. And then while each student is giving their speech, the rest of the kids are trying to guess what the scenario is. So this not only talks about context of what should be in a speech, but also things like tone and register. So it helps students practice coming up with things to say, makes them more comfortable, because it's a low pressure situation, because the rest of the students see it as a game. So while they're listening and paying attention, they're not focused necessarily just on what the student is saying, because they're a student speaking, but also trying to win and compete. And but it also helps with things like register and context. So why are you saying what you're saying? How does it add to the overall message you're trying to pursue? So those are a few of the learning activities that I would use to assess students' readiness for the project. Each one of these is a great formative assessment. It helps me see where they are, what they understand. And I had a few more ideas for formative assessments as well. So while students are researching, having one-on-one conferences, the ability to check what they're doing, how they're doing, if they have any questions. So kind of that putting like the immediate help as I'm circling the room and as they're working. The other formative assessment is having students turn in research early to check on progress and evaluate success. So having that rough draft sort of in draft process of checking, giving feedback and returning. So I understand where they are. I can assess what they need to know or what they don't know. And then reteaching and checking on MLA citations. A big portion of this is the citation piece, which is not particularly exciting, but having them create those citations early so I can check them, so I can return them, and have them redo them. Part of the English theory, of course, is that circular process. So from a teacher's point of view, that assessment helps me understand where they are, what they understand, but it also helps the students actually learn the material instead of just turning it in and never thinking about it again. And then summative assessments, of course, would be the final draft of their research, the written reports with the citations on their topic, their modern day witch hunt, and then the oral presentation itself. So putting all those skills, those practices into use. So this is my sort of plan of action for assessment. I find myself to tend to be sort of heavy in the formative assessments because I want students to be successful, and I feel like the more checks for understanding that they're given at the beginning of a project, the more successful they'll be at that summative end of the project. So this is my plan as of the moment. Thank you for your time.